The lead judge slammed his hand on the podium and jabbed a finger at the man in the faded gray work shirt. "Sir, sit down. You fix the vending machines. You don't get to lecture the smartest engineers in this country." And the whole auditorium laughed. Every rich parent, every sponsor, every camera. Ethan Carter didn't flinch. He set down his toolbox, picked up a marker, and walked toward the board they swore no human being could solve. What none of them knew was that the quiet janitor they'd just humiliated had personally designed the technology their impossible problem was built on. Stay with me to the very end of this one. And do me a favor, drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, so I can see how far this story travels tonight. If you've ever been underestimated in your life, hit subscribe. This story is for you. Ethan Carter woke at 4:40 in the morning, the way he had every morning for 11 years before the alarm could even try. He lay still for a moment in the dark, listening. Down the hall, his daughter Mia was breathing slow and even. Good. She'd finally fallen asleep sometime after midnight. He'd heard her light click off around 1, heard the soft rustle of blueprints being folded and refolded. The competition was in 3 days. She was scared. She didn't say it, but a father knows the sound of a scared kid pretending to sleep. He got up without turning on a light. He knew every board in the floor that creaked, and he stepped around them out of habit. The way you learn to move quietly in a small house when there's only one bedroom door between you and a child who needs her rest. In the kitchen, he started the coffee. Cheap coffee, the kind that came in a red plastic tub. He'd tasted better in his life. He'd tasted the espresso they served in glass conference rooms in Houston, in rooms where his name used to mean something. He didn't think about those rooms much anymore. Or he told himself he didn't. He poured a bowl of cereal, set it at Mia's place, and wrote on the little notepad by the sugar. "Eat something before school. You're smarter on a full stomach, Dad." Then, he laced up his work boots. The left one still held together with a strip of duct tape he'd promised himself he'd replace, and he went to work. The technology company where Ethan Carter worked took up 4 glass towers on the north end of Seattle. 3,000 people badged in and out of those buildings every day. Ethan knew maybe 4 of their names. They didn't know his. To the engineers and the executives and the 26-year-old product managers in their expensive sneakers, he was just the maintenance guy. The one who showed up when the HVAC rattled, or a door sensor died, or somebody jammed the third-floor copier again. He wore a name tag that said, Carter, and in 11 years, he could count on one hand the number of people who'd bothered to read it. "Hey you, guy!" A young man in a fitted vest snapped his fingers at Ethan by the elevators one morning that week. "The AC in conference room B is like a meat locker. Can you do something? We got a client at 9. "Yes, sir," Ethan said. "I'll take a look right now." "Cool, chop chop." The kid was already back on his phone. Ethan fixed it in 6 minutes. It was a simple thermostat calibration, the kind of thing that 20 years ago he'd have solved in his head while designing a satellite subsystem at the same time. He didn't say that. He never said that. He just closed the panel, wiped his hands, and moved on to the next work order. Because that was the thing about being invisible. After a while, you stop fighting it. You even start to like it in a way that a younger man wouldn't understand. Nobody expected anything from an invisible man. Nobody could take anything from him. He had exactly one thing left in the world that mattered, and it wasn't in that building. It was a 15-year-old girl with recycled circuit boards spread across the kitchen table and grease under her fingernails. There was one man in that building who saw Ethan differently, though he didn't know it yet. His name was Marcus Webb. Older fella, mid-60s security supervisor, gray mustache. The kind of man who'd worked 40 years and had no interest in pretending to be anyone he wasn't. He and Ethan had struck up the slow, patient friendship that 2 quiet older men strike up over years of nodding at each other in a break room. That week, Marcus found Ethan eating a sandwich alone by the loading dock. "You're quiet even for you," Marcus said, easing down onto a crate. His knees made a sound like the crate. "What's eating you, Carter?" "My girl's got a competition this weekend. National Young Innovators Challenge. Big deal. She earned her spot." "Well, hell, that's good news. Why do you look like somebody died?" Ethan turned the sandwich over in his hands and didn't eat it. You ever want something so bad for somebody else that it scares you, he said. Not for you, for them. So bad you can't sleep. Marcus was quiet a second. I got 3 kids and 9 grandkids, son. That's the only kind of wanting I got left. Ethan almost smiled. She built her whole project out of stuff other people threw away. Salvaged parts. Circuit boards I pulled out of the recycling bins here. I hope that's all right. Who am I gonna tell? Every other kid at that thing is gonna show up with equipment that costs more than my truck. Sponsored labs, private tutors, and my Mia's gonna walk in there with a machine she soldered on our kitchen table. He shook his head. And you know what kills me, Marcus? She's better than all of them. She's better than I was at her age, and I was... He stopped himself. You was what? I was pretty good once, Ethan said quietly. Long time ago. Marcus studied him, the taped-up boot, the work shirt, the calloused hands that turned a wrench all day, and something in the older man's eyes said he'd suspected for a long time that there was a great deal more to the quiet maintenance man than a name tag. Pretty good, Marcus repeated. Uh-huh. Okay, Carter, whatever you say. The truth was this: 22 years earlier, Ethan Carter had been one of the youngest lead engineers ever hired by one of the biggest aerospace firms in the country. Not the mailroom, not the floor, the design table. At 26, he'd solved a power distribution problem that a whole department of senior men had been chewing on for 2 years, a way to stop energy from bleeding out of a failing electrical network before the whole system collapsed. They'd named the architecture after the project, not the man the way big companies do. But the men in the room knew whose mind it came out of. He'd been on a rocket ship. Everybody said so. Youngest, sharpest, going all the way. And then his wife Sarah drove home from her sister's on a wet November night, and a man who'd had too much to drink ran a red light on Rainier Avenue, and Ethan Carter's entire future came apart on a wet road he wasn't even on. Mia was 4. For 3 months after the funeral, Ethan tried to keep doing both. Fly to the launch sites. Sit in the design reviews. Come home and be a whole father to a little girl who woke up screaming for her mother. He tried. He was a smart man, and smart men believe for a while that they can outthink grief. He couldn't. He remembered the exact night he quit. Mia had a fever. He was on a red-eye across the country for a review that couldn't happen without him, and his sister called him at the airport to tell him the fever had spiked and the doctor wanted to see her. And Ethan stood at a gate 2,000 miles away and understood with total clarity that his daughter had already lost one parent and was now functionally losing the other one to a job. He turned around, bought a ticket home, never went back. His mentor called him a fool. His director called it a temporary leave. Colleagues who used to fight to sit next to him at lunch stopped returning his calls within the year. That was fine. He'd made his choice, and he made it clean. He'd chosen fatherhood over fame. He'd never once regretted it. Not for himself. But there were nights like these 3 days before his daughter walked into a room full of people who'd already decided she didn't belong there, when the choice felt less like a peace he'd made, and more like a debt he was still paying. Dad, Mia's voice at the kitchen table that night. Can I ask you something and you promise not to say the dad thing? What's the dad thing? The "you're brilliant, sweetheart, you can do anything" thing. Ethan sat down across from her. Between them was her machine, a squat, ugly, beautiful little rig of scavenged parts wires running everywhere, a display she'd programmed herself. Okay, he said. No dad thing. Ask me straight, I'll answer you straight. She looked up at him. She had her mother's eyes. It got him every single time. Do you think I actually have a shot? She said. Or is everybody just being nice to me because we don't have money? Ethan didn't answer right away. That was one of the things his daughter trusted about him. He never gave her the fast, cheap answer. He always took a second like her question deserved the second. Straight, he said. Straight. I think your design is better than anything you'll see in that room. He said it flat, no music in it the way you say a fact. I think it's better because you didn't have money. You had to actually understand every part because you couldn't buy the part that thinks for you. That's not a disadvantage, Mia. That's the whole ballgame. You just don't know it yet. She stared at him. You really think that, or is that the dad thing wearing a costume? He laughed, a real one, rare enough that it surprised them both. You caught me, he said. That was maybe 15% dad thing. He leaned forward. But 85% of it is an engineer looking at a piece of good engineering. And I know the difference. Trust me, I know the difference. How do you know the difference? She said. You fix air conditioners. It was an innocent question. She meant nothing by it. She loved him completely. But it landed somewhere old and tender in him, and for just a second, his face did something before he could stop it. Mia saw it. She was too sharp not to. Dad? I fix a lot of things, Ethan said, and stood and kissed the top of her head. Go to bed soon. You're smarter on a full night's sleep, same as a full stomach. He didn't tell her. He'd promised himself years ago that he'd never tell her not to win an argument, not to make her feel better, not even to make himself feel like less of a ghost. Because the second Mia found out who her father had been, everything she did after would carry an asterisk. Her dad was somebody. That's why she's good. He would not let the world do that to her. Whatever she became, she was going to become it on her own name, out of her own head, with her own 2 hands. That was the gift. That was the whole gift. And you don't ruin a gift by signing your name on it. He didn't know yet that in 3 days, he'd have to break that promise in front of 500 strangers. They took the bus to the venue on Saturday because the truck's transmission was making a noise. Ethan didn't like the sound of, and he wasn't going to risk it dying on the freeway with his daughter and her machine in the back. Mia held the rig on her lap the whole way, wrapped in a towel like a sleeping baby. She didn't talk much. Ethan didn't make her. You've got your notes, he asked once. In my head. That's the only safe place. Good girl. The venue was one of those enormous glass convention halls. And the second they walked in, Ethan felt the temperature of the room shift around his daughter. Not the air, the people. He watched them clock her. The other kids polished, confident in matching team jackets with sponsor logos. The parents in cashmere and good watches. Their eyes slid over Mia's towel-wrapped machine, over Ethan's clean but cheap clothes, and his taped-up boot, and did the fast, cruel arithmetic that people with money do without even knowing they're doing it. Not one of us. Ethan had spent 11 years being invisible on purpose. He knew exactly what it felt like. He'd made his peace with it for himself. Watching them do it to his 15-year-old daughter was a different thing entirely. Something went cold and very still inside him. He kept his face pleasant. He was good at that. Hey! He crouched to Mia's level and fixed the collar of her shirt that didn't need fixing. Listen to me. Look at me. You see all this? He tipped his head at the jackets, the logos, the watches. None of it goes in the machine. You understand me? None of it changes what a good idea is. A good idea doesn't care what you're wearing. You always say that. Because it's always true. What's true doesn't change based on who's saying it. She nodded, squeezed the towel-wrapped rig a little tighter. And then a woman with a clipboard called for contestants to report to the staging area, and Mia had to go where he couldn't follow. Dad? Right here. I'll be right here the whole time. Promise you won't do anything embarrassing. He put a hand over his heart. Have I ever? Yesterday you told the bus driver a physics joke. That joke slapped. Nobody laughed. They laughed on the inside. It was a slow burn joke. She almost smiled. Then she was gone into the crowd of confident kids, a small girl with a towel-wrapped machine, and Ethan stood up and let the pleasant expression drop off his face for just 1 second, and then put it back on, and went to find a seat in the back. He met Rachel Morgan in the back row, though he didn't know she'd matter yet. She was young, an assistant engineer the event had hired to help run the technical side of the challenge. She had a laptop, 3 lanyards, and the specific exhausted look of a competent young person who's noticing that something around her isn't right and hasn't decided what to do about it. She ended up in the seat next to Ethan because it was the only open one in the back, and the back was where you sat when you didn't want to be seen. You a parent? She asked, making the polite conversation of 2 people stuck next to each other. My daughter's competing. Mia Carter. Oh, the salvage build. Rachel said it before she could stop herself and then winced. Sorry. That's what the judges are calling it. The salvage build. I didn't mean it like, it's all right. Ethan's voice was even. It is a salvage build. That's not an insult. Not to me. Rachel glanced at him. The work shirt the hands and made her own arithmetic, and to her small credit, she seemed a little embarrassed by the answer it gave her. Can I ask you something? Ethan said, watching the stage where the judges were taking their seats. Off the record, you run the scoring. I input it. I don't decide it. Who decides it? She hesitated. The panel. Officially. Ethan turned and looked at her. Just looked. He had a way of looking at a person that made them feel like lying was going to be more effort than it was worth. Officially, he repeated. Rachel opened her mouth, then closed it. It's my first year, she said quietly. I probably don't understand how these things work yet. No, Ethan said, turning back to the stage. You probably understand exactly how they work. That's the part that's bothering you. She didn't answer, but she didn't move to a different seat either. The lead judge was a man named Dr. Preston Vaughn, and he loved a microphone the way some men love the sound of their own name. Welcome, he boomed, to the final round of the National Young Innovators Challenge, where we don't just find bright kids, we find the future. Applause. Now, every year we present our finalists with a single problem, and every year I stand up here and tell you the same thing. He paused for effect. He was a man who lived for the pause. No student has ever produced a complete solution. Not one. In the history of this competition. Ethan sat forward an inch. Vaughn clicked a remote. The problem appeared on the screens all over the hall. Design a system to minimize cascading energy loss in a failing distributed power network. And Ethan Carter felt the strangest sensation of his entire life. It was the feeling of looking at a photograph of your own child. Because he knew that problem. He didn't recognize it. He knew it in his hands, in his sleep, the way you know the layout of the house you grew up in. It was his. Not similar to his. It was his, the exact class of problem he'd cracked at 26, the one they'd named after a project instead of a man, the one that had put his career into orbit before grief pulled it back down to earth. Somebody had taken the architecture he'd built 2 decades ago, wrapped it in a competition, and was now telling a room full of children that it couldn't be solved. He knew it could be solved. He'd solved it. Some of you, Vaughn was saying, will get close. Most of you won't. And that's okay. Because at this level, my young friend's failure is the real teacher. Ethan looked toward the staging area, where he knew his daughter was sitting with her towel-wrapped machine, being told by a man in a good suit that the impossible problem in front of her was impossible. It isn't, he thought. And you have no idea who's sitting in your back row. But he didn't move. He didn't say a word, because it wasn't his moment. It was hers. And a father who'd given up everything to protect his daughter's right to earn her own name was not going to stand up in front of 500 people and hand her his. Not yet. Not unless they made him. The favorite walked out first, and you could feel the room lean toward him. Oliver Hayes. 16. Tall and easy, camera-ready smile that had clearly been photographed a lot. His father, Gregory Hayes, was a billionaire investor who had. Rachel murmured this to Ethan without being asked, like it had been building up in her, and had to come out somewhere donated, somewhere north of $2 million, to the foundation that ran the competition. They didn't ask him to donate, Rachel said very low. I read the file, he offered, 6 weeks before the finalists were selected. Ethan didn't take his eyes off the stage. And Oliver made the finals. Oliver made the finals. Huh. I'm not saying anything, Rachel said quickly. I didn't hear you say anything, Ethan said. I heard you not say something real loud. On stage, Dr. Vaughn was already praising Oliver before the boy had presented a single thing. Extraordinary young mind, one to watch. The kind of thinker this competition exists to celebrate. Oliver soaked it up like it was owed to him, and maybe in his whole short life, it always had been. Then the contestants got to work. And Ethan Carter did the hardest thing he had done in years. He sat still, and he watched his daughter fight for her life at a folding table, and he did not help her. Chatang. She was magnificent. He watched her across the hall. He'd traded seats twice to keep a sight line. And he watched her work through the problem the way he used to work. Hunched, muttering wiring testing, cursing under her breath in the specific way she'd learned from a father who thought she couldn't hear him from the next room. Around her, the polished kids struggled. He watched a boy in a sponsored jacket give up and put his head down. He watched a girl start to cry and get quietly escorted off. The problem was doing exactly what Vaughn promised it would. It was breaking them. It wasn't breaking Mia. She'd found the same door Ethan had found 22 years ago. He could see it from the way her hands changed, went from searching to sure. She'd found the unconventional route. The one that looked wrong until you understood it was the only thing that was right. She was rerouting the load in a way the official approach would never let you do, because the official approach was built by people who'd inherited his architecture without ever understanding why it worked. His daughter didn't inherit it. She rediscovered it. From scratch. On a salvage build. On a folding table. In 3 hours. Ethan Carter sat in the back of a glass convention hall and put his hand over his mouth so nobody would see what his face was doing, because he was 51 years old and he had not cried in a very long time, and he was not going to start now in front of these people. She's got it. Rachel breathed beside him. She was watching Mia's display over the shoulders of 2 seated judges. Sir, she's got it. That shouldn't work, but that's... It works, Ethan said. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. Rachel turned and looked at him. Really looked this time. At the way he was watching the screen. At the way he'd said it works, not like a hopeful parent, but like a man reading a language he'd written himself. How do you know it works? She said slowly. Ethan didn't answer. Up on the main platform, Dr. Preston Vaughn was watching the same display Rachel was. And Ethan watched the judge's face do something interesting. He watched Vaughn realize a salvage-build girl with no sponsor and a father in a taped-up boot had just done the thing he'd promised the whole room was impossible. And he watched Vaughn's face decide he didn't like that. The results came an hour later. They put the scores on the big screens, and Ethan read them the way you read a diagnosis. Oliver Hayes, first place. His project Ethan had watched it fail its own load test twice, was incomplete. It didn't finish the problem. It gestured at finishing the problem. And it had the highest score in the building. Mia Carter, not placed. Rejected. And beside her name, a note. Solution deemed non-standard. Unverifiable. Does not conform to expected model. Non-standard. Ethan read that word 4 times. Non-standard. They'd looked at the correct answer. The more correct answer. The answer that was actually more advanced than their own official solution, and because it didn't look like the model on their answer sheet, they decided the girl was wrong instead of considering for 1 second that their sheet might be. That's not... Rachel had gone pale. She was scrolling on her laptop fast. Sir, the original scores. I entered the original scores 3 hours ago. These aren't someone went in after and changed them, Ethan said. I have the originals cached. She was Mr. Carter in the raw technical scoring. She was first. By a lot. Somebody moved her down and moved Hayes up after the panel closed. I can prove I have the... Don't do anything, Ethan said very quietly. Not yet. Save it. Save all of it. Don't let anybody see you looking at it. But that's fraud. I know what it is. His voice was still calm, but it had changed underneath, gone flat and hard as a table. I know exactly what it is. Save your files, Rachel. Just save them. And then he saw Mia. She'd come out from the staging area. She was standing at the edge of the crowd, holding her towel-wrapped machine against her chest, staring up at the screen with her name and the word non-standard next to it, and her face. Her face was the face of a child learning in public that the game was rigged and nobody was going to say so. He was up and moving toward her before he'd decided to. She saw him coming and tried to make her face okay and couldn't quite do it. Dad, she said. And then so quietly he had to lean down to hear it over the crowd. Maybe I'm just not good enough. Every insult those people had aimed at Ethan Carter for 11 years. You fix machines. Chop chop. Hey guy, you don't understand technology. Every single one of them bounced off him like rain off a windshield. Maybe I'm just not good enough. Out of his daughter's mouth went straight through his chest and out the other side. He crouched down in front of her, right there in the middle of all those people, and he took her face gently in his two rough hands. Look at me, he said. Mia, look at me. Listen to what I'm about to say, and remember I have never once lied to you in your whole life. You know that's true. She nodded, tears running now. You solved it, he said. You didn't almost solve it. You didn't get close. You solved a problem that man up there told 500 people no human being has ever solved. You did it on a table you built out of garbage other people threw away. Do you hear me? But the score. The score is wrong, Ethan said. Not you, the score. And there's a difference between being wrong and being cheated. And I need you to understand that difference right now, because you are about to watch your old man explain it to some people. Mia went still. She knew that voice. She'd only heard it a handful of times in her life. It was the voice her father used right before something changed. Dad, she whispered, what are you going to do? Ethan stood up. He looked toward the platform where Dr. Preston Vaughn was already trying to move the ceremony along quickly, already reaching for the microphone to make it official before anyone could ask a question. Already smiling the smile of a man who thinks he's gotten away with it. Ethan handed Rachel his phone. The files are backed up here. Yes, but... Then hold on to that, and don't lose your nerve. He picked up his toolbox from where he'd set it by the wall. He didn't need it. He just wanted his hands to have something to do on the walk-up, and old habits are a comfort. Then, Ethan Carter, the maintenance guy, the invisible man, the janitor with the taped-up boot, the father who'd given up everything so that no one would ever get to put an asterisk on his daughter's name, walked out of the back row he'd spent his whole life sitting in, and started up the aisle toward the front. The lead judge saw him coming. Sir, Dr. Vaughn said into the microphone, and his voice carried that same warm condescension he'd used on the children. The voice you use on someone you've already decided is beneath you. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to return to your seat. I understand emotions run high when a child doesn't place, but this is a professional event, and you're here to support your daughter, not to analyze technology you don't understand. And the room laughed. The rich parents, the sponsors, the cameras. They laughed at the man in the work shirt. Ethan stopped at the front of the aisle. He set his toolbox down on the floor gently and looked up at the judge, who had just told 500 people that Ethan Carter didn't understand the technology. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. Dr. Vaughn, Ethan said, before you make this official, I'd like to see the scoring criteria and the official solution you graded these kids against. The laughter thinned out a little. Something in the calm of the man's voice didn't match the taped-up boot. Vaughn's smile stiffened. The scoring is proprietary. The official solution has a mistake in it, Ethan said. The room went very quiet. I'm sorry, said Vaughn. Your answer key is wrong, Ethan said in the plain, patient tone of a man who has fixed 10,000 broken things and has never once needed to shout at any of them. It's got a flaw in the load balancing model. It's been wrong the entire time. That's why no student has ever completely solved your problem, doctor. It's not that they can't. It's that you've been grading the right answer as wrong for as long as you've been running this thing. He paused. My daughter didn't fail your test. Your test failed my daughter. Vaughn laughed again, but it came out wrong this time, too high. And I suppose you can tell me where the flaw is. Yes, Ethan said. You, the gentleman with the... Vaughn gestured and couldn't quite bring himself to finish it. The toolbox, Ethan said. Yes, me. He glanced back once at Mia, standing at the edge of the crowd, holding her salvage-built machine, watching her invisible father stand up straight in front of the whole world. Then Ethan Carter turned back to the judge, and to the impossible problem glowing on the screens, and to a room full of people who had already decided exactly how much he was worth. You want to know how I know your answer's wrong, he said, and he reached up and loosened the top button of his collar the way a man does when he's about to get to work. Because I'm the one who came up with the answer in the first place. The words landed in that hall like a stone dropped into still water, and for one full second nobody moved. Then Dr. Preston Vaughn laughed again, and this time it was the laugh of a man reaching for a rope he could already feel slipping through his hands. "You designed it," Vaughn said. "Of course you did. And I built the space shuttle in my garage. Sir, I don't know what you think you're accomplishing, but I'm going to give you one chance to walk back to your seat before I have security remove you from a children's event." At the word security, Ethan almost smiled, because 30 feet away, standing by the side doors with his arms folded and his gray mustache twitching, was Marcus Webb. The old security supervisor had come on his own time in his own clothes to watch his friend's daughter compete. And Marcus was not folding his arms in the manner of a man about to remove anybody. "You want to call security," Ethan said. "Go ahead, call him over. Marcus, you want to come remove me." Marcus Webb didn't move an inch. "Nope," he said loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I think I'll stand right here and see how this goes." A ripple went through the crowd. It was a small thing, but the room had just watched the judge's own threat get picked up and set down again like it weighed nothing. Vaughn's jaw worked. "This is highly irregular. You keep saying words like irregular and proprietary and non-standard," Ethan said. "You've got a whole bag of those words. You throw one out every time somebody gets close to a real question. You did it to my daughter's design, and now you're doing it to me." He took one step closer to the platform. "So let's stop throwing words. Let's look at the math. That's all I'm asking. Put your official solution on the screen. The answer key. Right now in front of everybody. And let me show you the mistake." "Absolutely not." "Why not?" "Because I don't take engineering lessons from—" Vaughn stopped himself, but not fast enough. "From the help," Ethan finished for him quietly. "That's the word you were reaching for, from the help." You could have heard a pin drop, and this was the first time in the whole evening that the room turned. Not all of it. Not yet. But somewhere in those rows of expensive people, a few of them shifted in their seats, and a few of them looked at the man in the work shirt a little differently. And a few of them started to wonder whether they'd just watched somebody powerful say the quiet part out loud. Off to the side, Rachel Morgan was standing now, clutching the laptop against her chest like a shield, and Ethan caught her eye for half a second. He gave her the smallest nod. "Not yet. Hold." "Dr. Vaughn." A new voice from the judge's table. It belonged to a woman, one of the associate judges, younger, and she had the pinched look of someone who'd been uncomfortable for the last 2 hours and had finally found a crack to speak through. "Maybe we should just put the solution up. If the gentleman's wrong, it takes 30 seconds to embarrass him, and we all move on." "Diane." "If he's wrong, Preston," she said, "what's the harm?" And there it was. The thing Vaughn couldn't answer without giving himself away. Because he knew what the harm was. The harm was that the man in the work shirt might not be wrong. "Fine," Vaughn snapped. He jabbed at the remote like it had insulted him. "Fine, put it up. Let's watch this man make a fool of himself, and then let's have him escorted out and get back to honoring these children." The official solution appeared on the screens all over the hall, and Ethan Carter looked up at 22 years of his own life staring back at him. There it was. His architecture. His load-balancing model, the one they'd named after a project instead of a man. Someone had cleaned it up, reformatted it, dressed it in the competition's logo. But underneath the new paint, it was his. The way a house you built is still yours, even after strangers move in and hang their own pictures. And there, right where he knew it would be, sitting in the fourth line of the load distribution sequence like a splinter under a fingernail, was the mistake. It wasn't his mistake. He wanted that clear in his own mind before he said a word. His original design had never had that error. Someone somewhere in the years between his design table and this convention hall had transcribed his work and gotten one term wrong. One sign flipped. One coefficient carried to the wrong side of an equation. A small thing. The kind of small thing that a room full of people who'd inherited the answer without earning it would never catch because they'd never had to build it from nothing. "There," Ethan said, and he pointed. Not dramatically. He just pointed the way you point at a leak. "Line 4, your redistribution term. You've got the sign backwards." Nobody in the audience could see what he saw, but they could see Dr. Vaughn's face, and Dr. Vaughn's face had gone the specific gray of a man watching a car accident from inside the car. That's a formatting convention, Vaughn said. That's not a mistake, that's different notation. It's not notation, Ethan said. Flip it and run it. Your model tells the network to send power toward the failure instead of away from it. Under light load, nobody notices. The system limps along and looks fine. But the second you stress it, the second there's a real cascade, which is the entire point of the problem, your official solution makes the failure worse. It doesn't solve the collapse, it accelerates it. He let that sit. That's why no student has ever completely solved your challenge, Doctor. Every kid who actually understood the physics ran into your backwards term and thought they were the ones who'd made an error. Because who's going to believe the official answer key is wrong? They're 15. They trusted you. His voice dropped. The smart ones failed because they were right and you graded them wrong. And the not-so-smart ones failed because they were wrong and you graded them right. Your whole competition's been running upside down for years, and none of you noticed because none of you can actually do the math you're pretending to judge. Somewhere in the middle rows, a man laughed. Not at Ethan, at Vaughn. And that single laugh from a paying sponsor in a good suit did more damage to Dr. Preston Vaughn than anything Ethan had said. This is absurd, Vaughn said, but his voice had lost its floor. You can't just walk in here off the street, then prove me wrong, Ethan said. You've got engineers in this building. You've got the model on the screen. Somebody up there flip the sign and run the stress test. Right now. 30 seconds, you said. If I'm wrong, embarrass me. I'll pick up my toolbox and walk out that door, and you'll never see me again. He turned slowly and looked at the whole room at all those faces. But if I'm right, every parent in this room is going to want to know why their kids have been getting graded against a broken answer key, and why the one child who beat it got told she was non-standard. The word non-standard hit the room like it had teeth now. At the edge of the crowd, Mia Carter had not moved. She was still holding her machine wrapped in its towel, and she was staring at her father with an expression Ethan had never seen on her face before, not once in 15 years. It wasn't pride exactly. It was something bigger and more frightened than pride. It was the look of a child watching a parent become a stranger and a hero in the same breath. Dad, she mouthed. Just that. No sound. Dad. He gave her the smallest smile. I've got it, the smile said. Stay right there. The younger Judge Diane had already leaned over to a technician at the side of the stage and was murmuring urgently. The technician's fingers were moving on a keyboard. Vaughn saw it and lunged half out of his chair. Don't you dare run that, Vaughn hissed, but he'd forgotten his microphone was still live. And don't you dare run. That went out over 500 speakers and echoed off the glass walls, and the whole room heard the lead judge of the National Young Innovators Challenge beg his own staff not to check the math. It was the worst thing he could possibly have said. The murmur in the crowd became something with a spine to it. Run it, someone called from the audience. Yeah, run it. Let's see it. 9 minutes and 40 seconds. That was how long it had been since Ethan Carter stood up from the back row. 9 minutes and 40 seconds to turn a room that had laughed at a janitor into a room chanting at a millionaire's hand-picked judge to run the numbers. And Ethan hadn't raised his voice once. The technician looked at Vaughn, then at Diane. Then, because he was a young man who had a career ahead of him and could feel exactly which way the wind had turned, he looked back at his screen and ran it. The stress test simulation went up on the big screens beside the solution. For a moment, there were two lines climbing across a graph, the way lines climb in every model of every failing system. One was the official solution. One was the same model with Ethan's single correction. The sign flipped back the way it was always supposed to be. The corrected line held, bent, strained, and held. The network survived the cascade. The official line, the answer key, they'd been grading children against for years, spiked, buckled, and fell off the bottom of the graph in a straight vertical drop. Total collapse. Every node dark. The room made a sound, not a gasp, bigger than a gasp. The sound a crowd makes when it watches something true happen right in front of it. Ethan Carter looked at the two lines on the screen, the one that lived and the one that died, and he thought about a wet road on Rainier Avenue 22 years ago and a little girl of 4, and every choice that had brought him to this exact spot, standing at the front of a room he was never supposed to belong in with a toolbox at his feet. He didn't feel triumphant. That surprised him. He'd expected to feel something like victory. Instead, he just felt tired and clear, the way you feel when you finally set down something heavy you'd been carrying so long you forgot it was heavy. That, Ethan said quietly into the silence, is why my daughter's design was rejected. Not because she was wrong, because she was right, and your answer key wasn't, and nobody in this building was qualified to know the difference. Dr. Preston Vaughn sat back down in his chair very slowly, like a man whose legs had stopped taking suggestions. And that was the moment Ethan Carter thought it was over. He was wrong. Because that was the moment a voice came from the doors at the back of the hall, smooth and unhurried, and used to being obeyed, and it said, "Well, this is quite a show." Every head turned. The man in the doorway was somewhere in his 60s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Ethan made in 3 months, and he walked into that convention hall the way a man walks into a building he's fairly sure he owns. Rachel Morgan went white. "That's Gregory Hayes," she whispered. "That's Oliver's father. He wasn't supposed to be here until he must have called him. Gregory Hayes, the billionaire, the $2 million donation, the father of the boy in first place." He strolled down the center aisle with his hands in his pockets, taking his sweet time, and he stopped a few feet from Ethan and looked him up and down with an expression of mild, amused curiosity, the way you'd look at a dog that had done a clever trick. "So you're the maintenance man," Gregory Hayes said. "The one who used to be an engineer. I've been getting texts. Half the board is having a heart attack in the parking lot." He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "You've made quite an impression, Mr. Carter, is it?" "Ethan Carter. Ethan Carter." Hayes said the name slowly, as if tasting it for anything that might be worth something. "And you've found a little error in our answer key. Congratulations. Truly. That's embarrassing for the Foundation, and heads will roll, and I'll make sure they roll properly." He spread his hands, magnanimous, generous, a man arriving to fix everything. "So let's fix it, right now. We'll regrade your daughter fairly. We'll give her a ribbon. A very nice ribbon. And we'll all go home." "A ribbon," Ethan repeated. "Second place. Perhaps we make it a tie for first. A shared honor. Very unusual, very generous. Everybody wins." Hayes lowered his voice, but not so much that the front rows couldn't strain to hear it, because he wanted them to. "Between you and me, Mr. Carter, you've had your moment. It was a good one. You embarrassed a pompous judge, and honestly, Preston had it coming. But you're a smart man. You used to run rooms like this, so you know exactly when a smart man takes the win and stops pushing." He smiled again. "Take the ribbon. Take the win. Go home with your daughter. Everybody remembers you tonight as the hero." And here was the thing that Ethan understood standing there in his work shirt that maybe nobody else in the room fully understood yet. Gregory Hayes wasn't offering him a ribbon. I was offering him a lid. A nice, quiet, generous lid to put back down on top of the thing they'd all just glimpsed. "We'll fix the answer key. Fine. We'll regrade the girl. Fine. And in the fixing and the regrading. The other thing, the thing Rachel had cached on a laptop. The thing about scores being changed after the panel closed. Students with money moved up, students without money moved down. That thing would quietly disappear. Because a broken answer key is an accident. Embarrassing, but an accident. Nobody goes to jail for an accident. Changed scores are a crime." Ethan looked at Gregory Hayes, and Gregory Hayes looked back, and both of them knew in that half-second exactly what was actually being discussed. "Your son's project didn't work," Ethan said. Hayes's smile didn't move. "Excuse me. Oliver's project. First place. I watched it fail its own load test. Twice." Ethan said it evenly, no cruelty in it, which somehow made it worse. "It's a fine effort for a 16-year-old, but it doesn't finish the problem. It can't. And it got the highest score in the building." He tilted his head. "So I've got a question, and I think everybody here would like to hear the answer. If your foundation's official solution has been broken for years, and none of your judges could tell the difference between a right answer and a wrong one, then how exactly did they know to give your son first place? The smile finally left Gregory Hayes's face. "Be very careful," he said, and there was no smoothness in it now. "I'm always careful," Ethan said. "I'm a careful man. Ask anybody I work for. I've spent 11 years being careful and quiet and invisible. Mr. Hayes, and I was fine with that. I was genuinely fine with it. You want to know the truth? I'd have stayed invisible for the rest of my life and been a happy man." He glanced once at Mia. "But then your people put the word non-standard next to my kid's name. And they did it to make room for a boy whose father wrote a check. And now I'm afraid careful and quiet is off the table." 12 minutes. That was how long Ethan Carter had been on his feet. And in 12 minutes, he had gone from a punchline to the single most dangerous man in that building. And Gregory Hayes, who had spent his whole life reading rooms and reading men, could see it. And for the first time in a very long time, Gregory Hayes did not know which way a room was going to break. "You have no proof of anything," Hayes said low. "You have a flipped sign in a spreadsheet. That's it. That's an error. It proves nothing about scoring, nothing about my son, nothing about anything. And if you stand in front of these cameras and accuse me of buying my child a first-place ribbon, I will own your truck, your little house, and whatever's left of that engineering reputation you seem so proud of for the rest of your natural life. Do you understand me?" And Ethan Carter looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "You keep saying I've got no proof." "Because you don't." "I don't," Ethan agreed. "You're right. A flipped sign proves your judges are incompetent. It doesn't prove they're crooked." He nodded slowly, like he was conceding the point. "You're a smart man, Mr. Hayes. You came in here and you found the exact soft spot in what I've got, and you pressed on it, and you're right to press on it. I've got no proof." Gregory Hayes allowed himself the smallest breath of relief. "But she does." And Ethan Carter turned and looked at Rachel Morgan. The whole room turned with him. Rachel stood there in the side aisle, 23 years old in her first job out of school, holding a laptop with the lead judge and a billionaire and 500 strangers and 3 television cameras, all suddenly looking at her. And Ethan watched the terror move across her face and understood exactly what he was asking of her. He was asking a kid at the start of her whole career to end it maybe right here in public, to do the right thing when the wrong thing was safer and quieter and would let her keep her job. He'd told her to hold her nerve. Now he was about to find out if she could. "Rachel," he said gently, "you told me you entered the original scores 3 hours ago, before the panel closed." Rachel didn't answer. Her mouth had gone dry. He could see it. "You told me somebody went in after," Ethan said in the same gentle, steady voice, a father's voice, a voice for a scared kid. "And changed them. And you kept the originals. Because some part of you knew when you saved that file that a day like today might come." He held her gaze. "You don't have to do this. I want you to hear me say that in front of everybody. Nobody in the world would blame you for closing that laptop and walking out that door and keeping your job. Nobody. You're 23. This isn't your fight." "Ms. Morgan," Gregory Hayes said, and his voice had gone soft and warm and paternal, and it was the most frightening sound in the room. "You're a bright young woman with a promising future. Contract engineers who understand discretion have very long careers in this industry. Contract engineers who make wild accusations at public events based on files they may have misread tend to find that no one will hire them. Ever. Anywhere. I'd hate to see a promising career end over a misunderstanding." He smiled at her, warm as a snake in the sun. "You're going to close that laptop now, aren't you?" And Rachel Morgan looked at Gregory Hayes. Then she looked at Ethan Carter. Then she looked past both of them at the edge of the crowd, at a 15-year-old girl holding a machine wrapped in a towel. A girl who'd built something brilliant out of garbage and gotten told she was non-standard, a girl who was watching to see what the adults in the room were made of. "You know what?" Rachel said, and her voice shook, and then it stopped shaking. "I make $41,000 a year. I've got student loans I'll be paying till I'm 50. And you're standing there telling me my whole future is worth keeping my mouth shut about you cheating a kid." She laughed a short, disbelieving, terrified laugh. "You must think my future's worth a lot more than I do, Mr. Hayes." And she opened the laptop. The room held its breath. "Original technical scores," Rachel said, and her fingers were flying now, and someone got a cable into the side of the podium, and her screen threw itself up onto the big displays for everyone to see. Entered by me, time-stamped 3 hours ago at 4:12 this afternoon, right after the technical panel closed. These are the raw scores. Look at them. Numbers filled the screen. Mia Carter, first, by 19 points. The biggest margin in the file. Oliver Hayes, fourth. A noise went through the crowd. And here, Rachel said, and her voice cracked and held, is the same file, modified, time-stamped, 5:47, an hour and a half later, after the panel had already closed and gone home. Same scores edited by an administrator login. Mia Carter dropped to unplaced. Non-standard. Oliver Hayes moved to first. 19 points erased with a keyboard. She looked up. You can't change a closed file without an admin credential. There are 2 admin credentials in this system. One belongs to Dr. Vaughn. She stopped. And one belongs to the Foundation's chief donor liaison, who reports directly to the office of Gregory Hayes. The silence after that was the loudest thing Ethan had ever heard. 15 minutes. From a punchline to this. Dr. Preston Vaughn had put his head in his hands, and Gregory Hayes. Ethan watched him. Watched the calculation happen behind those eyes. Watched a man who had bought his way out of 1,000 rooms search this one for the exit, and slowly, terribly fail to find it. The cameras were rolling. The sponsors were on their feet. The younger Judge Diane had her hand over her mouth. And 200 parents who had brought their own kids to this competition, kids who had lost to Oliver Hayes, were staring at the modified file on the screen with a rage that money can't buy and can't stop. That file is fabricated, Hayes said, but even he could hear how thin it came out. It's time-stamped and login verified on your Foundation's own server, Rachel said. I didn't make it. I just refuse to let you delete it. You're finished in this industry. You keep saying that, Rachel said, and there were tears on her face, but her voice was iron now. But I think you're the one who's finished, sir. I think everybody in this room just watched you get finished. And that was when Mia Carter finally moved. The whole time through the answer key, through the stress test, through the billionaire, and the ribbon, and the threats. Mia had stood frozen at the edge of the crowd holding her machine. But now she set it down gently on an empty chair. And she walked out through the parting crowd toward the front of the hall, toward her father, this small girl in her thrift store clothes, and the whole room watched her come. She didn't go to the microphone. She went to Ethan. She stood next to him and slipped her hand into his rough, calloused hand, the way she used to when she was 4 years old and the world was too big. Hi, Dad, she whispered. Hi, kiddo, he said, and his voice wasn't quite steady anymore either. You're not really a maintenance guy, are you? I'm really a maintenance guy, Ethan said. I just used to be some other things too. Mia looked up at the 2 lines on the screen, the one that lived and the one that died, and then at the modified scores beside them, and then at her father, and Ethan watched his daughter's whole understanding of the last 3 days rearrange itself behind her eyes. I did solve it, she said. Not a question. You solved it, baby. You solved it clean. They just didn't want me to. They wanted somebody else to, Ethan said quietly. That's a different thing, and it's got nothing to do with you. He crouched down to her level, still holding her hand. You hear me? I need you to really hear this one. Everything that happened on that scoreboard tonight, the non-standard, the 4th place. All of it. None of it was ever about whether you were good enough. You were the best one in the building. The problem was never you. The problem was them. And now everybody knows it. Not because I told them. Because you built it, and I just made them look. Mia's face crumpled, and she threw both arms around her father's neck. Machine and competition, and billionaire and cameras all forgotten. And she cried into his shoulder, the way she hadn't let herself cry in years. And Ethan Carter held his daughter in the front of a room full of the most powerful people in the city in his work shirt, in his taped-up boot, and he closed his eyes. And over the top of her head, he saw Marcus Webb still standing by the doors, still not removing anybody. The old security supervisor had taken his cap off and was holding it against his chest, and his mustache was trembling, and he gave Ethan a single slow nod that said everything a nod could ever say. Somebody, Gregory Hayes said to no one, to the room, to the cameras that would not stop, "Somebody get me the head of this foundation on the phone right now." But the head of the foundation was already walking down the aisle, and she did not look like she wanted to take Gregory Hayes's call. She was a woman of about 70, and she had run this competition for 19 years, and she had just watched the whole thing. She'd built Get Turned Inside Out in 15 minutes by a maintenance man and a 23-year-old with a laptop, and her face was a war between horror and something that looked almost like relief. "Mr. Hayes," she said, "I think you need to leave." "Eleanor, I think you need to leave," she said again louder, "before I have to explain to 200 families and 3 news cameras why you're still standing in my building." She turned to the room, and her voice broke a little, but she pushed it out anyway. "There will be a full independent audit. Tonight's results are void. Every result for the last 5 years is going to be reviewed. And She stopped and looked at Mia, still wrapped around her father's neck, and something in the old woman's face gave way entirely. "I'm sorry," she said to the girl. "I'm so sorry. You deserved so much better than what we did to you tonight." 16 minutes. Gregory Hayes stood in the middle of the aisle for one more moment, a silver-haired man in a suit worth more than a truck and a house. And he looked around a room that had a quarter of an hour ago been entirely his. The sponsors wouldn't meet his eyes. The parents were glaring. His own son Oliver was standing near the staging area with a look of dawning sickened comprehension on his face. A 16-year-old realizing in real time and in public that his first-place trophy had never been his at all. "Dad," Oliver said, small, lost. "Dad, is that did you?" And Gregory Hayes did not answer his son. He turned and he walked back up the aisle and he left, and the whole room watched the richest man any of them had ever met walk out of a competition he'd bought and lose it anyway. The doors closed behind him, and the hall was quiet. Ethan stood up slowly, Mia still holding his hand, and he found himself looking out at 500 faces that were all looking back at him, and he realized he had no idea what to do next. He'd spent 11 years being invisible. He genuinely did not know how to be seen. It was Marcus Webb who broke it. The old man put his cap back on his head, and he started to clap. Slow, deliberate. One old security guard clapping alone at the back of a silent hall. And then Rachel Morgan set down her laptop and joined him. And then Diane, the associate judge, who'd asked, "What's the harm?" And then a father in the third row who'd brought a daughter who'd lost. And then the whole room came up off its feet at once. All of it, the sponsors and the parents and the students and the sound they made, rolled forward and broke over the man in the work shirt, like a wave. And Ethan Carter stood there in the middle of it, holding his daughter's hand, and did not know what his face was doing, and for once in his careful, quiet, invisible life, did not try to fix it. Mia leaned up close, so he could hear her over the roar. "Dad," she said, "everybody's looking at you." "Yeah. Are you okay?" And Ethan Carter looked down at his daughter, at Sarah's eyes and Mia's face, at the girl he'd walked away from a whole life to raise, at the brilliant kid who'd built the answer to an impossible problem out of things the world had thrown in the trash, and he found that he was somehow, after everything, telling her the truth when he answered. "Yeah, kiddo," he said, "I really am." But even standing there in the middle of that ovation, with his daughter's hand in his, and the whole room finally seeing him, Ethan Carter felt it. The small, cold, certain knowledge that a man like Gregory Hayes does not walk out of a room he's lost and simply go home. Men like that do not lose. They regroup. And somewhere out in that dark parking lot, a billionaire was already making phone calls, and not one of those calls was going to be kind. And the fight that had just started in this bright glass hall was a very long way from over. I was right about the phone calls. They started before Ethan and Mia even made it out of the parking lot. Ethan was helping her load the machine into the back of the truck, still wrapped in its towel, when his own phone buzzed in his pocket with a number he didn't recognize. He let it go to voicemail. It buzzed again 10 seconds later. Same number. He let that one go too. "Who is it?" Mia asked. "Nobody worth answering at 10 o'clock at night," Ethan said, and shut the tailgate. But the third time it rang, he stepped away from the truck and picked up, because a man who ignores 3 calls in a row is a man who's afraid. And Ethan Carter had decided somewhere back in that hall that he was done being afraid. Mr. Carter. A woman's voice. Crisp, professional, expensive. My name is Catherine Voss. I'm an attorney representing the interests of Mr. Gregory Hayes. I'm calling to give you an opportunity to resolve tonight's events before they become complicated for you. Ethan glanced back at the truck at Mia's silhouette in the cab and walked a little farther into the dark. It's late, Ms. Voss. It is, which is why my client is being generous. Here's where we are. You made some serious public accusations tonight. Defamatory ones. My client is prepared to consider all of it a misunderstanding born of a father's understandable emotion, provided we can agree on a few things. A pause, the sound of a woman shuffling papers she'd already memorized. 1. You issue a signed statement acknowledging that the scoring discrepancy was a clerical error, not misconduct. 2. Ms. Morgan does the same and returns all foundation files in her possession. 3. Everyone signs an NDA, and this evening is never spoken of again. In exchange, your daughter is quietly awarded first place. Your family receives a settlement. I think you'll find very reasonable, and my client's name stays out of it. She let it land. This is the good version, Mr. Carter. I strongly advise you take the good version. Ethan was quiet for a moment. Out over the water, he could see the lights of the city, all those buildings, all those rooms he used to belong in. How much? He said. I'm sorry. The settlement. You said reasonable. I'm asking how much. There was a note of relief in the lawyer's voice, the relief of someone who'd found the lever. My client is authorized to offer $250,000. Ethan let out a low whistle. $250,000. For a maintenance technician raising a child alone, Voss said smoothly. I'd imagine that changes a great deal. College, a house that isn't well. It's life-changing money, Mr. Carter. And all it cost you is agreeing that a mistake was a mistake. And here was the thing. For one honest second, Ethan thought about it. Not the way she wanted him to. But he thought about the transmission in the truck that was going to die within the year. He thought about the taped-up boot. He thought about Mia's college applications sitting in a drawer and the number at the bottom of the aid forms that never quite worked out. $250,000 was not an abstraction to a man like Ethan Carter. It was Mia's whole future handed to him in a dark parking lot in exchange for one signature. That was what made men like Gregory Hayes so dangerous. They never offered you nothing. They offered you exactly the thing you'd wanted your whole life, and they made you the one who had to say no to it. Ms. Voss, Ethan said, can I ask you something, one professional to another? Of course. If it was really just a clerical error, a mistake like you keep saying, why does making it go away cost $250,000 and an NDA? He let that sit. People don't pay to bury accidents. They pay to bury the other kind. You know that. You went to law school. You know exactly what the price tag tells everybody. The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. That's a no then, Voss said, and all the warmth was gone. That's a no. Mr. Carter, I want to be very clear about what you're choosing. My client has resources you cannot imagine. He will not sue you tomorrow. He'll wait. He'll let you feel safe. And then 6 months from now, when you've spent your savings on a lawyer and forgotten to be afraid, he will file suit and bury you in a process that will take 3 years and cost more than you'll earn in 10. He'll subpoena your finances, your employment history, your late wife's insurance settlement, your daughter's school records. He will make your life a full-time job of survival. That's not a threat, it's just the shape of things. Are you certain you want that shape for your daughter? And it was the mention of Sarah, your late wife's insurance settlement, that told Ethan everything he needed to know about who he was dealing with, because they'd done their homework already. In the 2 hours since he'd stood up in that hall, someone working for Gregory Hayes had already pulled the file on a dead woman. You leave my wife out of your client's mouth, Ethan said very quietly, and something in his voice made the lawyer stop. He hung up. He stood in the dark for a moment, breathing, and then he walked back to the truck and got in and started it, and the engine turned over on the second try, and he was grateful for that small mercy. Everything okay? Mia asked. Yeah, kiddo. You're doing the thing where your jaw does the thing. Ethan almost laughed. The Hayes family sent a lawyer to offer us money to say nothing happened tonight. Mia was quiet. Then, how much money? Enough that I want you to know I thought about it for a second. I want to be honest with you about that. I thought about it, because it would have meant college and a real truck and a lot of things I've wanted to give you for a long time. He pulled out of the lot. And then I said no. Why? Because they weren't paying for the money to change your life, Ethan said. They were paying to make you agree that what they did to you was okay. And you can put $250,000 on a lot of things, Mia. But you don't put a price on that, not with my kid. Mia didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she reached over and put her hand on her father's arm and left it there the whole drive home. Rachel Morgan wasn't so lucky, and Ethan found that out the next morning. She called him at 7 a.m., and her voice was thin and scraped out the voice of someone who hadn't slept. They fired me, she said, effective immediately. HR called me at 6:30 in the morning. Ethan, 6:30. They said I violated data protocols by accessing and publicly disclosing confidential scoring information. A shaky breath. They're framing me. They're making the thing I did to expose them into the crime. And there's a letter from a lawyer, Catherine Voss. They're saying if I talk to the press or further disseminate the files, they'll sue me for breach of contract and theft of trade secrets. Ethan, they're calling the scores trade secrets, and I can't. I make $41,000. I can't fight a... Her voice broke apart entirely. What did I do? Oh my God. What did I do? And this was the part Ethan had been dreading since the moment he asked a 23-year-old to open a laptop in front of a billionaire. Rachel, listen to me. Slow down. Breathe. He waited until he heard her breathing slow. You did the right thing. I know that's not worth much at 7 in the morning with a lawyer's letter in your hand. But it's true, and it's going to stay true. And someday, it's going to be worth a great deal. Right now, I need you to not sign anything. Not one thing. Don't answer their calls. Don't email them. You send everything to me. Can you do that? Why, so they can bury you instead. A wet, awful laugh. You're a maintenance guy, Ethan. I'm a fired contractor. He's a billionaire. This isn't a movie. The janitor and the intern don't beat the billionaire in real life. In real life, the billionaire owns the courthouse. And Ethan Carter sat in his kitchen in the gray morning light and thought about that. Because she wasn't wrong. That was the terrible part. In the cold arithmetic of it, she was completely right. Money won these fights. It won them almost every time. He'd watched it happen from the inside, back when he was somebody, and he'd watched it happen from the outside every single day for 11 years. But there was one thing Gregory Hayes had in his overwhelming confidence failed to account for, and it had been sitting in the back of Ethan's mind since the parking lot. Rachel, Ethan said slowly. You said the file was modified with an admin login, the donor liaison's login, the one who reports to Hayes. Yeah. And you said you couldn't change a closed file without admin credentials. Right. So the modifications got a timestamp and a login ID on the Foundation's own server. Yeah, but they'll delete it or say it was corrupted, or Ethan, they control the server. They control the live server, Ethan said. And for the first time that morning, something sharpened in his voice, the old engineer waking up. But that's a competition running national contestants. Federal grant monies involve the National Young Innovators Challenge, gets Department of Education funding. It's in their own promotional material. They brag about it. You take federal money, you've got compliance requirements, records retention, audit trails, third-party backups they don't control and can't just quietly delete without somebody noticing. He was standing now pacing his small kitchen. That server backs up somewhere they don't own. It has to. It's the law. Which means the original file and the modified file both exist somewhere Gregory Hayes can't reach with a phone call. Silence on the line. How do you know that? Rachel said. Because 20 years ago, I was the guy who had to build compliance systems for government contracts. Ethan said. I know exactly what a records retention requirement looks like, and I know exactly how much money it costs to violate one, and it's more money than even Gregory Hayes wants to spend. He stopped pacing. He can bury me. He can bury you. But he can't bury a federal audit trail. And I think that's the one thing he's not thinking about right now, because in his whole life, nobody's ever made him think about it. Rachel was quiet for a long time. "You really used to be somebody," she said finally. It wasn't a question. "I really used to be somebody," Ethan agreed. "Send me everything, Rachel, and go get some sleep. We're not done. We've barely started." The story broke that afternoon, and it broke without any help from Ethan at all. It turned out that a room with 3 television cameras and 200 angry parents does not stay quiet, no matter how many NDAs a lawyer waves around. Somebody in that hall had filmed the whole thing on a phone. The answer key, the stress test, the 2 lines on the graph, Rachel's time-stamped files up on the screen, Gregory Hayes walking out. And by 2 o'clock that afternoon, the clip was everywhere. Mia found it first on her phone, and she came into the kitchen holding it up with an expression Ethan couldn't read. "Dad," she said, You're kind of famous." The video had a title somebody else had written. "Billionaire's son caught cheating janitor. Dad exposes the whole thing." It had, when Mia showed it to him, 400,000 views. By dinner, it had 2 million. Ethan watched 30 seconds of it and had to stop. It was strange beyond words to see himself from the outside. The work shirt, the toolbox, the taped-up boot, his own quiet voice saying, "Because I'm the one who came up with the answer in the first place," and to hear underneath it the sound of the whole room laughing at him right before it all turned. "I don't want to be famous," he said. "I know. I really don't, Mia. That's not I didn't do it for that. I know, Dad." She sat down next to him. "But you kind of are now, and so am I. There's like 1,000 comments, and half of them are people saying they got treated the same way. Not at the competition, just in their lives. People who got passed over or laughed at or told they weren't the right kind." She scrolled. "This one guy wrote that he watched it 4 times and cried, and he's 62, and nobody's ever stood up for him like that in his whole life." She looked up. "You didn't just do it for me. I don't think you know how many people needed to see somebody do that." And Ethan Carter, who had spent 11 years making sure nobody ever looked at him, sat at his kitchen table and understood that he'd become overnight and entirely against his will. A thing that a great many quiet, overlooked, underestimated people were suddenly looking at very hard. His phone rang. He almost didn't answer. But it wasn't Catherine Voss's number, and it wasn't a number he knew, so he picked up. "Is this Ethan Carter?" A man's voice. Older. Careful. "Who's asking?" "My name's Frank Delgado. I'm a reporter. I used to be anyway. I'm mostly retired now. I do a little independent work. I'm not calling to ask you for a quote. Mr. Carter, I promise. I'm calling because I spent 30 years covering the aerospace industry in this country, and I saw that video today, and I know your name." A pause. "I knew your name 20 years ago. You disappeared. A lot of us wondered what happened to you." Ethan sat very still. "You were going to be one of the great ones," Delgado said quietly. "And then one day, you were just gone. And now here you are 20 years later, in a work shirt, taking apart a rigged competition on a phone video." A dry, warm chuckle. "Mr. Carter, I've got a question I've wanted to ask you for 2 decades, and I finally get to ask it. Where the hell did you go?" And Ethan looked across the kitchen at Mia, who was watching him with those eyes that were her mother's eyes, and he understood that this was the first time in 11 years anyone had asked him that question who actually already knew the size of what the answer meant. "I went home," Ethan said. "I had a 4-year-old who'd just lost her mom, so I went home and I raised her." There was a silence on the line, and when Delgado spoke again, his voice had changed. "You walked away from all of it," the reporter said. "For that." "For her," Ethan said. "Best decision I ever made. I'd make it again tomorrow." "Mr. Carter," Delgado said, "I don't think you understand what's happening right now. That video's got 5 million views, and it's climbing, and every engineer my age, whoever knew your name, is texting every other engineer, and the question going around isn't who's the janitor. The question going around is, do you have any idea who that janitor actually is?" A pause. "Gregory Hayes picked a fight tonight, and he thinks he picked it with a maintenance man. He has no idea he picked it with a legend that half the industry thought was dead. And when that comes out, and it's going to come out Mr. Carter with or without you, the whole story changes. Ethan closed his eyes. He'd spent 11 years building a wall around who he used to be, not out of shame, out of love, so that Mia could grow up as her own person, unweighted by a father's shadow. And now that wall was about to come down. Come down not because he chose to knock it over, but because a billionaire had shoved a girl in a thrift store shirt 1 inch too far. If that story comes out, Ethan said slowly, my daughter stops being the girl who solved the impossible problem. She becomes the daughter of the famous engineer. Everything she did last night gets an asterisk on it. That's why she's good. Look who her dad is. His voice roughened. I spent her whole life making sure the world never got to do that to her. That's the whole reason I stayed invisible, Mr. Delgado. Not for me. For her. There was a long pause on the line. Can I tell you something, one father to another? Delgado said. I've got a daughter too, and I spent a lot of years thinking the best thing I could do for her was clear the road ahead so she'd never hit a bump. A breath. And you know what she told me when she was grown? She told me the bumps were where she found out what she was made of. That the smoothest roads I paved for her were the ones that taught her the least about herself. He let that settle. Your girl already solved the problem, Mr. Carter. On her own. In a room full of people who bet against her. Nobody can put an asterisk on that. It happened. There were 3 cameras. The whole country watched her do it before anyone knew your name. His voice gentled. The world knowing who her father is doesn't erase what she did. It just means she solved it, and then her old man stood up and made them admit it. That's not an asterisk, son. That's the rest of the story. And Ethan Carter sat in his kitchen and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time, which was the specific disorienting sensation of a belief he'd built his whole life around cracking down the middle and letting a little light in. Across the table, Mia had stopped scrolling. She was watching him. Dad, she said quietly when he'd hung up. Who was that? A reporter, an old one. He knew me, from before. From your other life, the one you don't talk about. Yeah. Mia was quiet for a second. Then she said the thing that decided everything. I want to know about it, she said. Not because of the competition, not because of any of this. She gestured at her phone at the millions of views. Just because you're my dad, and there's this whole part of you I never got to see, and I'm 15 now, not 4. And I think I'm old enough to know who my dad was before he was just my dad. Her voice wavered. You gave up something huge for me, didn't you? You never said. But I'm not stupid, Dad. I do the math. Whatever you were somebody, and you stopped being them so you could make me breakfast and drive me to school in a truck that barely runs. And you never once made me feel like I cost you anything. You didn't cost me anything, Ethan said, and his voice was thick. That's the part I could never figure out how to explain. Everybody thought I gave something up, and I kept trying to tell them I didn't give anything up. I chose. I picked the thing I wanted. I picked you. Every single day for 11 years I picked you, and I never once looked back and wished I'd picked the other thing. He wiped his face with the back of his hand, rough, embarrassed. Look at me. 51 years old, crying in the kitchen. It's okay, Mia said. You can cry in the kitchen. It's your kitchen. And Ethan laughed, wet and helpless, and pulled his daughter across the little table into a hug. And for a moment, the lawyers and the billionaire and the 5 million views all fell away. And it was just the 2 of them in a small kitchen, the way it had been for 11 years, the way it had always been enough. But it couldn't stay just the 2 of them. Ethan knew that even as he held her, because a fight had started whether he wanted it or not, and Rachel Morgan was sitting alone somewhere with a lawyer's letter and no job and a legend that half an industry thought was dead, was about to walk back into the light, and a billionaire in a dark office across the city was making calls with a very different arithmetic than the one Ethan had used in the parking lot. His phone buzzed again. Catherine Voss. He looked at it ring. This time he answered on speaker, and he set the phone on the kitchen table between him and Mia, because he'd decided his daughter was old enough to hear how the world really worked. Ms. Voss. Mr. Carter. Her voice had lost every trace of the warmth from the night before. I'll be brief. The offer of $250,000 is withdrawn. Given the video circulating online, which contains my client's private image and constitutes a coordinated defamation campaign, we are moving to a different posture. Papers again. My client will be filing suit Monday morning. Defamation, tortious interference, and civil conspiracy naming you Ms. Morgan and any parties who assisted in the recording or distribution of last night's event. We'll be seeking damages in excess of $4 million. A cold pause. I told you last night this could get complicated. You chose complicated, Mr. Carter. I hope your daughter appreciates the principle. It's going to cost her a great deal. And Ethan looked across the table at Mia, who had gone pale at $4 million, and he made a decision he'd been circling since the phone first rang in that parking lot. Ms. Voss, he said, before your client files anything Monday, I want you to give him a message from me, word for word. Can you do that? Go ahead. Tell him I know about the federal records retention requirements on the Foundation's grant funding. Ethan said, slow and clear, an engineer laying out a proof. Tell him I know the modified score file exists on a third-party audit backup. His people don't control and can't delete. Tell him I know that altering federally audited competition records to redirect the outcome isn't a civil matter. It's a compliance violation that brings the Department of Education's Inspector General into it, and possibly a good deal worse. He paused. And tell him that the second he files a defamation suit against me, discovery opens. And in discovery, my lawyer gets to subpoena that server. The real one. The one he doesn't own. He let that sit in the silence. He wants to sue me, Ms. Voss. Good. I've got nothing. He can't take what I don't have. But a lawsuit is a two-way door, and he's about to open it, and I don't think he's thought hard enough about what walks through it from my side. The silence on the line was total. Where? Catherine Voss said finally, and her voice was different now. Careful. Did a maintenance technician learn about federal records retention compliance? And Ethan Carter looked at his daughter, and his daughter looked back at him, and he took a breath, and for the first time in 11 years, he said it out loud to someone who understood what it meant. I didn't learn it as a maintenance technician, Ethan said. I learned it when I was building government contract compliance systems for one of the biggest aerospace firms in the country. Before your client was writing checks to rig children's science fairs, Ms. Voss. I was the youngest lead engineer they'd ever hired. He paused. You should tell Mr. Hayes to look up who designed the load distribution architecture his broken answer key was copied from. Have him look up the name. And then have him ask himself if he really wants to open discovery against the one man in the country who can prove exactly what that server is hiding. A beat. I'll wait for his call. He's got my number now. He reached out and ended the call. The kitchen was silent. Mia was staring at him with her mouth slightly open. Dad, she whispered. What did you just do? I stopped being invisible, Ethan said. His hands were shaking a little now that it was done. For 11 years, I've been quiet because quiet kept us safe. And this morning I realized quiet doesn't keep us safe anymore. Quiet is exactly what he's counting on. He looked at his daughter. He's spent his whole life sure that people like us fold, that we take the $250,000 or we get scared off by the $4 million, and we sign the paper and we disappear. And most of the time he's right, Mia. That's the ugly truth. Most of the time people like us fold because we can't afford not to. His jaw set. So we're going to be the time he was wrong. Mia was quiet. Then, you're scared. I'm terrified, Ethan admitted. I've got maybe $11,000 in savings, and he's got a law firm that bills that before lunch. If I've got the compliance thing wrong, if that backup doesn't exist, or his people got to it, he really can bury us. I won't lie to you about that. I'm not going to be the dad who pretends there's no risk. There's a lot of risk. He reached across and took her hand. But I looked at it every way I know how all last night and all this morning, and every way I look at it comes down to the same thing. Either we agree that what they did to you was fine, or we don't. And I am not going to raise a daughter who thinks the right move when a rich man cheats you is to take his money and be quiet about it. He squeezed her hand. I'd rather lose everything we've got teaching you the other thing. And Mia Carter looked at her father for a long moment. This quiet man who fixed air conditioners and made her breakfast and had It was turning out given up an entire life she'd never known about so that she could have hers. "Then we don't fold," she said. "Then we don't fold." Ethan's phone buzzed on the table between them. Not a call. A text. From a number he didn't recognize, though he'd know soon enough that it was one of Gregory Hayes' personal lines. Because men like Hayes don't stay behind their lawyers. When the ground shifts under them, they come out and handle it themselves. And the fact that Hayes was texting him directly 30 minutes after Ethan had mentioned the server told Ethan everything about how hard that mention had landed. The text was 4 words long. "We need to talk." Ethan looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned the phone face down on the table, and he stood up, and he went to the counter and picked up the pot. "You want some coffee?" he asked his daughter. "It's terrible coffee. It comes in a red tub. But it's ours." "Yeah, Dad," Mia said, and there were tears standing in her eyes, and she was smiling through every one of them. "I want some of the terrible coffee." And Ethan Carter poured 2 cups of cheap coffee in his small kitchen, while a billionaire's text sat face down and waiting on the table. And for the length of time it took to drink them, he let it wait, because he had learned something over 11 quiet years that Gregory Hayes had never once had to learn. He'd learned exactly how much a man could stand to lose and still be rich, as long as he had the one thing that couldn't be bought sitting across the table from him, drinking the terrible coffee and calling him Dad. He let the text wait until the coffee was gone. Then he picked up the phone and he typed back 3 words. Tomorrow. Public place. Because Ethan Carter was not going to sit down alone with Gregory Hayes in a private office where there'd be no witnesses and no record, and nothing but one man's word against another. He'd learned that much from 11 years of watching how power liked to arrange its rooms. If Hayes wanted to talk, they'd talk somewhere with other people in it. The reply came in under a minute. An address downtown, a hotel restaurant 11 the next morning. And then a second text which Ethan read twice. "Come alone. Leave the girl home. This is between men." Ethan showed it to Mia. "He wants you to leave me home," Mia said, reading over his shoulder. "Because he thinks you'll be softer if I'm not there, or braver if I am. He's trying to figure out which." Ethan looked at his daughter at how fast she'd seen it, and felt that particular ache of a parent watching a child grow up in real time. "When did you get so sharp about people?" "I've been watching you read people my whole life," Mia said. "I just never had a reason to do it out loud before." She handed the phone back. "I'm coming." "Mia, he said this is between men. It's not. It's about me. It started with my name and the word non-standard next to it. And if he's going to sit in a fancy restaurant and try to make a deal about my name, then I'm going to be sitting there when he does it." She crossed her arms, and for a second she looked exactly like her mother exactly, and it stole the breath out of him. "You raised me to not fold, Dad. You don't get to make an exception the first time it's scary." And Ethan Carter, who had spent the whole morning telling a lawyer and a reporter and himself that his daughter was old enough now, found he had no argument left that didn't make him a hypocrite. "Okay," he said. "You're coming. But you let me do the talking unless I look at you. If I look at you, that means it's your turn. Deal. Deal." They didn't go alone, though, and that was the part Gregory Hayes hadn't planned for. Because that night, Frank Delgado, the old reporter, called back, and Rachel Morgan called too, and by the time Ethan hung up with both of them, there was a plan that had grown 3 sizes past a quiet breakfast. Delgado had spent the afternoon making calls to people he'd known for 30 years, and what he'd found had changed the shape of everything. "Ethan," Delgado said, and his voice had the electric steadiness of an old newsman who's found the thread. "I talked to a woman today, former Foundation employee. She left 2 years ago, and she left angry, and she's been sitting on something ever since, because she didn't think anybody would ever listen to her." A pause. "It's not just this year, son. It's not just your daughter and the Hayes boy. She says the score changes go back at least 4 years. Every year, a handful of results moved after the panels closed. And every year, the kids who got moved up had parents who'd made major donations in the months before the finals. She's got emails. She's got a spreadsheet she copied before she quit. She was too scared to ever use it." His voice tightened. "She saw your video today. And she called me an hour ago and said, and I'm quoting her, If a janitor's got the guts to stand up in that room, then I'm done being a coward. Ethan sat down slowly. 4 years, he said. At least 4, maybe more. Ethan, this isn't a rigged science fair anymore. This is a pattern. A donation for outcomes pattern, running for years in a federally funded program. That's not embarrassing. That's the kind of thing that ends careers and starts investigations. And you cracked it open by accident in 15 minutes on a Saturday night over a flipped sign in a spreadsheet. And here was the twist that reorganized the whole board, the thing. Ethan understood the instant Delgado said it. Gregory Hayes wasn't texting him because he was afraid of a lawsuit. Hayes had lawyers for lawsuits. Hayes was texting him personally at night because somewhere in the last 24 hours, Hayes had realized that the maintenance man hadn't just caught him cheating for his son. The maintenance man had pulled a thread that, if it kept pulling, unraveled 4 years of quiet corruption that a dozen wealthy families were tangled up in. And those families were not going to be happy with the man who'd exposed them all. Gregory Hayes wasn't the shark in the water anymore. He was a man who suddenly had a lot of other sharks looking at him. "He wants to meet me tomorrow," Ethan said. "Public place. Wants me to come alone." "Of course he does," Delgado said. "Because right now, Ethan, you're the only person who might make this go away for him. If he can buy you, he can frame the whole thing as one father's misunderstanding. Get you to sign that it was a clerical error and the pattern never comes out. You're not his enemy tomorrow. You're his last exit." A dry laugh. "He's going to walk in there thinking he's the one with all the leverage. And he has no idea that I spent today finding the woman with the spreadsheet, or that she's willing to talk on the record now, or that I've got 2 other former employees who'll corroborate." A pause. "You want to know what real leverage is, son? Go to that meeting. Let him make his offer. Let him think you're considering it. And find out how much he's willing to pay to make you disappear. Because whatever number he says out loud, that number is the size of what he's hiding. And I'd very much like to know that number." Ethan was quiet. "You want me to wear a wire," he said. "I want you to bring your daughter's phone in your shirt pocket with the voice memo running," Delgado said. "Washington's a one-party consent state. You're a party to the conversation. It's completely legal for you to record it. And a recording of Gregory Hayes offering a maintenance man money to bury a federal compliance violation is worth more than every lawyer he owns." The restaurant the next morning was exactly the kind of place Ethan had spent 11 years never setting foot in, all white tablecloths and hushed voices and waiters who could tell in one glance how much your watch cost. He walked in wearing his good shirt, the one clean button-down he owned, and he had Mia's phone in his breast pocket with a red dot quietly recording, and he had Mia herself walking in beside him with her chin up. Gregory Hayes was already seated. He watched them come, and Ethan saw the flicker of irritation cross his face at the sight of the girl. "I said come alone," Hayes said when they reached the table. "You said a lot of things," Ethan said, pulling out a chair for Mia and then one for himself. "I ignored most of them. This is my daughter. This is about my daughter. She stays." Hayes studied Mia for a moment, and then visibly decided to change tactics to be charming, to be warm, the way a snake decides which shape to be. "Mia," he said, smiling, "you really are a remarkable young engineer. I mean that. What you built from those materials at your age, it's genuinely extraordinary. My son couldn't have done it. I'll say that to your face." The smile widened. "Which is exactly why I want to make this right." "You want to make it quiet," Mia said. "That's a different thing." Ethan almost choked on his... Hayes's smile stiffened at the corners, and Ethan gave his daughter the smallest look. "Easy, let me work," and Mia sat back. "She's sharp," Hayes said to Ethan. "Gets it from you, I'd imagine." He folded his hands. "All right, let's not waste each other's morning. Here's the situation as I see it. You've got a video. It's embarrassing. My son looks bad, I look worse, and Preston Vaughn is finished, which frankly, he had coming. Fine. But an embarrassing video is not a lawsuit, Mr. Carter, and it's certainly not proof of anything beyond a scoring error. So the question in front of us isn't legal, it's practical." He leaned in. "How do we both walk away from this with what we actually want? You want your daughter recognized and taken care of. I want my family's name out of the headlines. Those two things are not in conflict. They're a deal waiting to happen. Keep talking, Ethan said. And Gregory Hayes, sitting in a white tablecloth restaurant, entirely confident he held the leverage, entirely unaware of the red dot recording in Ethan's shirt pocket, began to lay out the size of what he was hiding. $500,000, Hayes said. In a trust for Mia. College graduate school seed money for whatever company she wants to start someday, and she'll be able to start one a kid this talented. Plus, a formal apology from the foundation, first place recognition, the whole thing. In exchange for a signed statement that the scoring issue was an administrative error, an NDA covering the specifics, and your public request that people stop sharing the video. He spread his hands. $500,000, Mr. Carter, for a signature. That's more than you'll make in the next 15 years. And your daughter never has to worry about money again. Ethan let it hang. Yesterday it was $250,000, he said. This morning, it's $500,000. That's a lot of movement in 15 hours, Mr. Hayes. The situation's evolved. It sure has. Ethan turned his water glass slowly on the tablecloth. See, that's the thing that keeps bothering me. Last night, when you thought it was just a flipped sign and one angry dad, it was worth $250. Now it's worth double, which tells me you found out overnight that it's not just a flipped sign and one angry dad. He looked up. What did you find out, Gregory? What's got the price going up so fast? For the first time, something moved behind Gregory Hayes's eyes that wasn't confidence. I don't know what you mean, he said. I think you do. Ethan kept his voice easy, conversational, a man discussing the weather. I think you spent last night making calls the same as I did. And I think somewhere around midnight, somebody told you that a fired contractor with a laptop wasn't your real problem. I think somebody reminded you that this isn't the first year the scores got moved after the panels closed. And I think you realized that the maintenance man who stood up in that room by accident had his hand on a thread that doesn't just unravel you, it unravels a whole lot of your friends. He tilted his head. How am I doing so far? The blood had gone out of Hayes's face. He recovered fast. Men like him always recover fast, but Ethan had seen it, and so had Mia, and so had the red dot in his pocket. You're speculating, Hayes said low. Maybe, Ethan said. But here's the part that isn't speculation. You just offered me $500,000 to sign a piece of paper. And a man does not offer $500,000 to make a clerical error go away. He offers $500,000 to make a crime go away. You told me that price yourself just now without meaning to. Every time the number goes up, you're telling me and everybody how scared you are of what's underneath it. He leaned in and dropped his voice, and for just a moment let Gregory Hayes see the man he actually was, the engineer, the mind that had solved the unsolvable at 26. I could name that number back to you in front of a judge someday, Gregory. $500,000 offered by you to me at this table this morning. Wouldn't that be something? And Gregory Hayes went very, very still. You're recording this, he said. Ethan didn't answer. You son of a... Hayes sat back, and his charm was gone now entirely, and what was left underneath it was cold and ugly, and finally honest. You think a recording saves you? You think you're the first person who tried to squeeze me with a phone in his pocket? I have made recordings disappear. Mr. Carter, I have made people disappear, not the way you're thinking. Don't be dramatic. I mean their jobs, their credit, their standing, their ability to be believed by anyone who matters. I can make you a crank. I can make you a bitter failed engineer with a grudge and a conspiracy theory. By the time my people are done, that video won't be a hero janitor. It'll be an unstable man who harassed a family and coached his daughter to lie for attention. He was breathing hard now. You want to do this the hard way? I have been doing things the hard way since before you were pushing a mop. I will win. I always win. And your daughter, your remarkable daughter, will spend her first year of college watching her father get financially and publicly destroyed. Is that the lesson you want to teach her? And this was the moment. Ethan had known it was coming since the parking lot, since the first phone call, since the number started climbing. The moment where Gregory Hayes stopped bargaining and started threatening, because bargaining hadn't worked, and threatening was the only other language he'd ever needed. Ethan looked at his daughter. He looked at her, the small, deliberate look, the one they'd agreed on. If I look at you, it's your turn. And he sat back, and he let Mia Carter answer the billionaire. Mia leaned forward. 15 years old, in a shirt from a thrift store in a restaurant where the water cost more than her lunch usually did, and she looked Gregory Hayes dead in the eye. "You keep saying you always win," she said. Her voice shook for exactly one word and then went steady. "But you didn't win Saturday night. I did. In front of 3 cameras before anybody knew my dad's name before any of this. I solved your problem, and your own judges couldn't tell, and the only way you could take it from me was to pay somebody to change a number after everyone went home." She swallowed. "That's not winning, Mr. Hayes. That's what losing looks like when you've got enough money to hide it. And you've had enough money to hide it your whole life, so I don't think you even know the difference anymore." She sat back. "My dad gave up everything he was so that nobody could ever put an asterisk on what I did. You spent $2 million to put one on your own son. I almost feel sorry for Oliver. Almost." The table was silent. Gregory Hayes stared at the 15-year-old girl who had just said calmly to his face the truest and most devastating thing anyone had said to him in perhaps 30 years. And then Ethan reached into his breast pocket, and he took out Mia's phone, and he set it on the white tablecloth between them. Red dot glowing, still recording, so that Hayes could see exactly what it was. "I'm not going to squeeze you, Gregory," Ethan said quietly. "That's the part you can't understand, and it's why you're going to lose. I don't want your money. I never did. I don't want to make you disappear. I'm not you." He stood up and pulled out Mia's chair for her. "This recording isn't for a judge, and it isn't for blackmail. I already gave a copy to a reporter this morning before we walked in. A good one. Old school. Frank Delgado. You can look him up. Your people probably already have. And there's a woman with a spreadsheet that goes back 4 years and 2 more who'll back her up. And they all decided to stop being scared right around the time 5 million people watched a janitor stand up in a room." He picked up the phone and put it back in his pocket. "You didn't come here today because you had leverage. You came here because I'm the last exit you've got, and you were hoping I was cheap. I'm not cheap, Gregory. I'm not for sale at any number, and that's the one kind of person your whole life never taught you how to beat." Gregory Hayes opened his mouth. Nothing came out. "The story runs Wednesday," Ethan said. "Delgado's giving you until then out of professional courtesy to get your own statement ready. That's more courtesy than you gave my daughter." He put his hand on Mia's shoulder. "Come on, kiddo. We're done here. Leave the man his breakfast." And Ethan Carter and his daughter walked out of that white tablecloth restaurant past the waiters and the hushed voices and the watches. And they left Gregory Hayes sitting alone at the table with an offer he couldn't take back, and a threat that hadn't worked, and the slow, dawning understanding of a man who has just realized that the ground he's stood on his whole life was never actually ground at all. Wednesday, the story ran. It didn't run small. Frank Delgado had spent 30 years building the kind of reputation that made editors return his calls, and when he brought them a story with a video that already had 8 million views, 3 named whistleblowers, a 4-year spreadsheet, and a recorded settlement offer from a billionaire, they didn't bury it. They led with it. The headline used Ethan's own words, the ones from the hall, the ones the whole internet had already memorized, because I'm the one who came up with the answer. And underneath it, the story that Delgado had spent his last good years of reporting waiting to write the whole pattern, 4 years deep, donation by donation, moved score by moved score. The woman with the spreadsheet on the record at last. The federal grant money. The compliance violations. The Department of Education quoted in the piece confirming it had opened a preliminary inquiry, and woven all the way through it. The part that made the story travel, the part that made 62-year-old men watch it 4 times, and cry the engineer, who'd been one of the youngest and brightest in the country, who'd walked away from all of it the day he understood his motherless daughter needed a father, more than the world needed another satellite who'd spent 11 years invisible and content, and who'd only broken his silence when they put the word non-standard next to his little girl's name. By Wednesday night, the foundation had suspended operations pending the federal review. By Thursday, 3 of the families named in the spreadsheet had lawyered up against each other, every one of them scrambling to prove they were the least guilty, and Gregory Hayes, who had spent a lifetime as the man everyone in the room deferred to, discovered what it felt like to be the man everyone in the room was suddenly desperate to distance themselves from. He never did file the lawsuit. Catherine Voss called Ethan one last time on Thursday afternoon, and her voice was flat and tired, and underneath it, something that might almost have been respect. "There won't be a suit," she said. "My client has other priorities now." "I imagine he does," Ethan said. "For what it's worth, Mr. Carter." A pause. "In 11 years of doing this job, I've never watched anyone turn down that much money. Not once. I told him you would. He didn't believe me." Another pause. "Can I ask you something off the record? Genuinely." "Go ahead." "Why, really? Not the speech you gave at the table." "I heard the recording. Everybody's heard the recording. The real reason. A man doesn't turn down $500,000 for a principal. There's always something underneath." And Ethan Carter stood in his kitchen and looked out the window at the driveway, where Mia was crouched over the open hood of the old truck with a wrench in her hand and grease on her face. Fixing the transmission, she'd insisted on learning to fix herself, and he gave the lawyer the only answer that had ever been true. "Because 11 years ago I decided what my daughter was worth," Ethan said. "And it wasn't a number. And I wasn't going to stand there and let your client teach her that everything has a price, when I've spent her whole life teaching her that the most important things don't." He watched Mia get the bolt loose and pump her fist in the driveway, triumphant, greasy 16 kinds of alive. "That's the real reason, Ms. Voss. There's nothing underneath it. That is the underneath." The lawyer was quiet for a long moment. "She's lucky," Catherine Voss said finally. "Your daughter. To have someone who'd—" She stopped. "Never mind. Goodbye, Mr. Carter. I hope I never see your name in a case file. I mean that as the highest compliment I know how to give." She hung up, and Ethan set the phone down on the counter, and he picked up 2 mugs, and he poured the terrible coffee that came in a red tub, and he carried both cups out to the driveway to sit on the tailgate next to his daughter, who had just entirely on her own, with her own 2 hands, and nobody's name, but her own, fixed the thing everyone else would have paid to have somebody else fix. They sat on the tailgate and drank the terrible coffee, and for a little while, neither of them said anything, because some silences are the good kind. "You know what's funny?" Mia said, finally wiping grease off her hands onto her jeans. "A week ago I thought my whole future came down to whether some judges liked my project. And now the foundation's gone, the judges are getting investigated, and I'm sitting on a truck fixing a transmission with my dad." She laughed. "I didn't even win anything. Technically. They voided the whole competition." "You won the only thing that mattered," Ethan said. "What's that? You found out you were right the whole time, and you found out you don't fold." He bumped her shoulder with his. "Some people go their whole lives without learning either one. You got both before you turned 16. That's a good year, kiddo." But it wasn't over, not the way Ethan thought it was, and he found that out 2 weeks later when a letter came. It wasn't from a lawyer this time. It was thick, cream-colored, with a return address he recognized before he even opened it, because it was an address that had lived in his chest for 22 years. The aerospace firm. The one that had hired him at 26. The one he'd walked out of the day his daughter needed him more than they did. He held it for a long moment before he opened it. Inside was a letter hand-signed from a name. He knew an old colleague, older now, who'd been a junior engineer back when Ethan was the youngest lead they'd ever had, and who had in the intervening 2 decades risen all the way to the top of the company. The letter was short. It said they'd seen the story. It said the whole building had seen the story. It said that half the senior staff had trained on architecture Ethan had designed and never known his name, and now they did. And the man at the top of the company wanted to know one thing. "Come back. Any role you want. Name it. We should never have let you go." Ethan read it twice. Then he set it on the kitchen table, and he sat down, and he stared at it for a long time. That was where Mia found him. "Dad? What's that?" She picked it up before he could stop her, and he watched her read it, watched her eyes move down the page, watched her get to the part that said, "Any role you want. Name it," and watched her understand exactly what her father was being offered. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Dad, this is everything you gave up. They're giving it back." "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "You could go back." She set the letter down like it was made of glass. You could have the whole life, the real life, the one you were supposed to have. Her voice wavered. You should take it. You have to take it. You gave it up for me, and now you can... Mia, you can have it back. Dad, don't you get it? For 11 years, you've been fixing air conditioners when you could have been. You were going to be one of the great ones, that reporter said, so everybody says so. Mia. He said it gently, and he took her hands across the table, both of them grease and all. Sit down. Look at me. She sat. She looked at him. I want you to hear me, because I'm only going to say this once, and I need you to carry it for the rest of your life. He held her hands tight. 11 years ago, I stood in an airport, and I got a phone call that you were sick, and I was 2,000 miles away, and I realized my little girl had already lost one parent, and was about to lose the other one to a job. And I turned around, and I came home. And everybody. Mia, my mentor, my boss colleagues who'd known me for years, everybody told me I was throwing my life away. He took a breath. And they were wrong. Every single one of them was wrong. Because I didn't throw my life away. I found it. My life was never in that building. My life was a 4-year-old who needed somebody to make her breakfast and drive her to school and tell her she was smart on a full stomach. His voice cracked. You were never the thing I gave up my life for, kiddo. You were the life. Mia was crying now silently the way she cried when it was real. So no, Ethan said. I'm not taking the job. Not that one. Not the one where I fly to launch sites and sit in design reviews and come home too tired to hear about your day. I already had that life. I traded it on purpose with both eyes open for the best 11 years any man ever got. And I would do it again. I would do it 1,000 times. He wiped her cheek with his thumb, rough and gentle at once. The only thing I regret is that for 1 second back in that hall, I let some man in a good suit make you wonder if you were good enough. That's the only part I'd take back. Not the 11 years. Never the 11 years. Mia threw her arms around him, and Ethan held his daughter in the small kitchen, and the cream-colored letter sat on the table, and he did not want it, and he knew it all the way down. But that wasn't the end of it either. Because Ethan Carter wrote back. He didn't say no. He said something else. He said he wasn't coming back to the life he'd left, but that if the company was serious about what they'd written, there was something he did want. He wanted them to fund a program. A real one with real money behind it. For kids like Mia. Kids who built brilliant things out of garbage because nobody would give them anything better. Kids who got looked past because of where they came from, what their parents did, how their clothes looked. Kids who walked into rooms full of watches and cashmere and did the fast, cruel arithmetic on themselves before anybody else even got the chance. He wanted to find those kids. He wanted to mentor them. He wanted to be the man who looked at the quiet one in the corner with the salvage build and said, I know exactly what you are, and it's the best thing in this room. That he wrote is the only role I want. Fund that, and I'm your man. Anything else, and I'll stay right where I am fixing your air conditioners, and I'll be a happy man doing it. They funded it. Of course they funded it. The story had 8 million views, and a federal investigation attached to it, and a company that had just watched a former employee become a national symbol of everything. Decent was not going to say no to being part of the next chapter. But Ethan didn't care why they said yes. He only cared that they did. The program took his wife's name. The Sarah Carter Foundation. Ethan hadn't planned that it came out of his mouth in the first meeting before he decided to say it, and once it was out, he knew it was right. Because Sarah had been the one all those years ago who'd seen a shy young engineer nobody was paying attention to at a company mixer and walked straight across the room and said hello. She'd spent her whole short life doing exactly the thing the foundation was going to do. Seeing the person in the corner. Walking across the room. The first kid they found was a boy named Marcus. Not Marcus Webb, though the old security guard cried when he heard the name. A different Marcus, 14 years old, who'd built a working water filtration rig out of parts he'd pulled from a junkyard because the water where he lived wasn't safe and nobody was coming to fix it. He'd entered it in a regional fair and gotten a participation ribbon while a kid with a store-bought kit took first. Ethan drove 4 hours to meet him. They said it was too simple, the boy told him. Defensive arms crossed, braced for another adult who didn't get it. The judge said real engineering is more sophisticated. Ethan crouched down and looked at the rig for a long time. Really looked. The way he'd looked at Mia's machine on the kitchen table. "Son," he said, finally. "Can I tell you something? A very smart man told my daughter once. Somebody said her work was too simple too, non-standard. And you know what I figured out?" He stood up. "Simple isn't the insult they think it is. Simple means you understood the problem so completely that you cut away everything that didn't matter. Any fool can make a thing complicated. It takes a real engineer to make it simple." He put his hand on the boy's shoulder. "This isn't too simple. This is clean. You understand the difference." And the boy, 14 armored braced, looked up at Ethan Carter with an expression that Ethan had seen exactly once before on his own daughter's face in a glass convention hall. The moment she stopped believing she wasn't good enough. "Nobody ever said that to me before," the boy said. "Get used to it," Ethan said. "You're gonna hear it a lot from now on." Mia came to work at the foundation on weekends once it got going. She was 17 by then, and she had a way with the younger kids that Ethan couldn't teach and couldn't take credit for, though he suspected she'd learned some of it from watching him, and some of it from being the kid in the corner herself. She was standing next to him at the first real showcase. The foundation ever ran a room full of kids with salvage builds and junkyard rigs, and nobody, not one single person, doing the cruel arithmetic on them when she said the thing that closed the circle. "Hey Dad, remember when I asked you why you didn't tell everyone who you were back at the competition before all of it?" "I remember. You said you didn't want me to succeed because of your name. You wanted me to succeed because of mine." She watched the kids across the room, the water filtration boy showing his rig to a girl who'd built a prosthetic hand out of bicycle parts. "I used to think that was you being humble, or stubborn, or scared of the spotlight." She turned to him. "But that's not what it was it? You weren't protecting your name from me. You were protecting my name from yours, so that whatever I built it would always, always be mine." Her voice went thick. "You gave up being known so that I could become known, and you never said a word about it. For 11 years. Ethan didn't answer right away. That was one of the things his daughter had always trusted about him. He never gave the fast, cheap answer. "You want to know the truth," he said finally. "Straight. Straight." He watched the room full of kids nobody had ever bet on. "Being known was never worth much to me. I had it once. It's overrated." People clapped for me in rooms like that competition hall, and half of them didn't mean it, and the other half forgot my name by the parking lot. He put his arm around his daughter's shoulders. "But there's one person on this earth who knows exactly who I am. All of it. The engineer, the janitor, the widower, the dad who tells bad physics jokes to bus drivers. One person who knows the whole man and loves him anyway." He kissed the top of her head. "I didn't need 8 million people to know my name, Mia. I needed one. And I've had her since she was 4 years old." And Mia Carter turned into her father's chest, in a room full of kids who'd been told they weren't good enough by people who couldn't do their math. And she cried the good kind of tears, and Ethan Carter held his daughter, and looked out over the whole beautiful room, and he understood finally and completely the thing it had taken him 51 years to learn. The world had spent a lifetime telling him what he was worth. The company had put a number on it at 26. The kid at the elevator had put a number on it at 50. Gregory Hayes had put 4 different numbers on it in 3 days, each one bigger than the last, and every one of them wrong. They'd all looked at Ethan Carter and done the fast, cruel arithmetic, and they'd all gotten the same answer, and the answer was not much. They were all wrong, because the man they'd dismissed as the maintenance guy, the man they'd laughed at, the man they'd told to sit down and stop analyzing technology, he didn't understand that man had known something none of them ever would. He'd known that the loudest person in the room is almost never the one with the answer. He'd known that brilliance doesn't announce itself, and it doesn't wear a good watch, and it doesn't need a sponsor. He'd known that the quiet person in the corner, the one everybody's already decided doesn't belong, might just be the one holding the solution the whole room gave up on. And he'd known the thing that Gregory Hayes, with all his money, would go to his grave never understanding. That the greatest mistake a person can make is believing they already know someone's worth before they've ever bothered to learn their story. Ethan Carter had been the janitor they thought was nobody. He turned out to be the only one in the building who knew the answer. And in the end, standing in a room full of overlooked kids who would grow up knowing their worth because one quiet man had refused to let anyone tell them otherwise, holding the daughter he'd chosen over every ambition the world had ever offered him. Ethan Carter had become exactly what he'd always been underneath the name tag and the work shirt and the taped-up boot. Not the man they thought was nobody. The man who was everything that actually mattered. And that was a truth no amount of money could buy, no lawyer could bury, and no judge could ever grade as nonsense.